Hello everyone, welcome back to the questions based on jurisprudence. Today's first question: who are the key figures in American legal realism? Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., Carl Llewellyn, and Jerome Frank. How does law contribute to public safety? By setting penalties for crimes and maintaining order in public spaces. What does critical race feminism emphasize? Critical race feminism highlights the unique oppression faced by women of color and critiques both mainstream feminism and critical race theory for neglecting their experiences. How has feminist jurisprudence influenced the legal reforms? Feminist jurisprudence has contributed to changes in laws regarding marriage, divorce, sexual harassment, domestic violence, and reproductive rights. What is Austin's command theory of law? Law is a command issued by a sovereign and backed by sanctions for disobedience. What is Hart's rule of recognition? Law consists of primary rules that govern behavior and secondary rules that define, change, and adjudicate primary rules. What is Kelson's pure theory of law? Law is a hierarchy of norms with a fundamental norm that is ground norm from which all laws derive authority. What does natural law theory state about the law? Law reflects universal moral principles or divine laws independent of human legislation. How does the sociological definition view law? Law is an evolving social phenomenon based on customs and lived practices. How does law promote fairness and justice? By establishing equality and protecting against discrimination. What role does law play in institutionalizing social norms? It codifies values like honesty and respect, ensuring consistency. How does law deter antisocial behavior? By imposing penalties such as fines and imprisonment. Why do realists argue that law is indeterminate? Because judicial decisions are influenced by personal beliefs, politics, and a societal context. What is Scandinavian legal realism's main focus? The psychological and sociological factors influencing judicial decisions. Who were the key figures in Scandinavian realism? Axel Hegerstorm, Alf Roos, and Carl Olive Krona. What is the legal concept of reasonableness? Reasonableness ensures fairness, equality, and justice in laws, government actions, and judicial decisions, acting as a check against arbitrary or excessive state actions. Which constitutional articles in India are most associated with the principle of reasonableness? Article 14, that is right to equality, and Article 21, that is right to life and personal liberty, primarily invoke the principle of reasonableness. What was the significance of the ruling in a State of Madras versus G. Rao in 1952? The Supreme Court held that restrictions on fundamental rights must be reasonable and necessary to protect public interests such as security and public order. How does Scandinavian realism view legal norms? As commands from authorities rather than abstract moral values. How does law promote a social welfare? By enabling policies that address inequalities in areas like health and education. Why is adaptability important in law? Adaptability ensures laws remain relevant to changing social and economic conditions. What is the overall impact of law on society? It ensures stability, security, economic growth, and a social harmony. How is language a normative system? Language has rules for grammar, syntax, pronunciation, and a meaning that dictate communication. Do language norms remain constant over time? No. They evolve and vary between linguistic communities. Why do legal realists reject formal legal reasoning? They believe judicial decisions are shaped by practical, social, and political considerations. What role does law play according to legal realists? Law is a tool for social change and should adapt to evolving societal conditions. How do legal realists judge the effectiveness of law? By its real-world consequences and impact on society rather than its formal structure. What is the central criticism legal realists have of traditional legal theories? That they focus too much on rules and their logic while ignoring how law actually operates in society. What is the role of normative systems in religious orders? They guide behavior, rituals, and ethical conduct and spiritual beliefs. Give an example of a religious normative system. The Ten Commandments in Christianity or Sharia law in Islam. What is the feminist critique of legal formalism? Feminists argue that law is not a neutral or objective, but it reflects gendered power imbalances. How does feminist jurisprudence redefine legal principles? Feminist jurisprudence challenges the notion of legal neutrality and it calls for laws that consider the lived experiences of marginalized genders. What is the main goal of utilitarianism in law? To promote the greatest good for the greatest number. Which two philosophers are most associated with utilitarian views of law? Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. According to utilitarianism, what should laws aim to maximize? Social welfare and overall happiness. How does utilitarianism view the role of law in maintaining social order? Laws should promote a public welfare to ensure harmonious and peaceful coexistence. What method does utilitarianism suggest for evaluating laws? A cost-benefit analysis. How did Dwaraka Prasad Lakshmi Narayan versus State of Uttar Pradesh 1954 apply the principles of reasonableness? The court ruled that state-imposed restrictions on property rights must not be arbitrary or excessive and must serve a legitimate public purpose. What issue was addressed in Krishna Chandra versus Commissioner of Police 1961? The court emphasized that police actions must be reasonable, lawful, and follow due process to protect personal liberty under Article 21. What was the key ruling in Hardan Shah versus State of West Bengal 1975? The court ruled that restrictions on freedom of movement must be justified, reasonable, and proportionate to their intended purpose, such as public safety. Why was the employment policy in Air India versus Nargesh Mirza 1987 declared unreasonable? The Supreme Court found the policy discriminatory based on gender and age, ruling it arbitrary and unconstitutional under the principles of equality and fairness. What two key factors are considered in the cost-benefit analysis of laws? Potential benefits, for example, economic growth, individual freedom, etc., and costs, for example, social harm, restrictions on liberty, etc. How does law influence ideology? Through education, media, and promotion of legal principles. How can law drive social change? By introducing reforms such as civil rights laws and gender equality legislation. What challenge does law face in social control? Balancing regulation with individual freedoms. How does law maintain order? By providing clear rules and consequences for violations. What is historical materialism? Historical materialism is Karl Marx's theory that views history as a series of class struggles driven by material economic forces. According to Karl Marx, what is the primary function of the state in a class society? The state functions to protect the interests of the ruling class. What is the role of the state under socialism? Under socialism, the state suppresses the bourgeoisie and enforces the transition to a classless society. What does Karl Marx mean by the withering away of the state? Karl Marx believed that as class distinctions disappear, the state will gradually dissolve because it will no longer be needed to enforce class rule.